All right, as Joe's not here, I got to start all this stuff here. So give me just a second. There we go. All right. Well, tonight I want to take a moment to kind of look back at what we were talking about on last week. We really covered a whole lot of stuff in looking at the Epic of Gilgamesh. Because the Epic of Gilgamesh was that Mesopotamian flood account that was discovered, and we've seen a few pieces of that and excerpts from it. We kind of compared the biblical account with that, and the point was that so many people in our world today claim that that's where the Bible got its information from a pagan source. Well, that, as we looked at last week, and I'm not going to rehash everything tonight, but it would seem not plausible for you to have taken a story that doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can't rebuild that cube and make it float, and all of the things have the 7 days, all the things that are out there, and then somehow or another the Hebrews realized that account was wrong. And then they said, well, we're going to fix it, and we're going to actually build a boat, or we're going to write about a boat that would actually fit all of those animals and would actually float. There is no evidence that the Hebrew people had any type of shipbuilding knowledge within themselves to know how to do all of those things. So anyway, as we looked at all of that, there's a lot of problems that they have with the Epic of Gilgamesh and all the rest of it. And you can go back and look at those things last week to see about it. But obviously the conclusion was that the biblical account is the most authoritative account that we have. And I got to turn this around because it's showing me that it's offline and it's bugging me. If it's not working, it just doesn't work. Tonight, though, we're going to really go in and look at the flood account itself and what does the Bible say, and look at what is taking place as they go and enter the ark. So we're going to look at the flood begins and it rises in Genesis 7, 1 through 24. So we're going to look at the entire chapter, but it should not really take altogether that long. I want to break it down here in a couple of verse segments because I can't go back and forth on the computer as seamlessly as Joe would be able to do if he were here to help. But I'm going to try to pull this up so I may be able to do it a little bit better in just a second. There we go. All right. So here in verse 1, it says, "The Lord then said to Noah, 'Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation.'" "Take with you 7 of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 2 of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate." See, this is why you have people to help you. "And also 7 of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will write from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And Noah did all the Lord had commanded him." Okay. As you look at those first 5 verses, you just see that God telling Noah and his family and the animals that they need to go and enter into the ark. God reiterates to Noah that he was found righteous. We've seen that out of all the people on the planet at this point, it's just Noah that was found righteous, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, and they're the only human beings that God is going to allow to go into the ark. But God tells Noah to take 7 of every kind of clean animal and 2 of every kind of unclean animal. If you're going to really understand what does God mean by a clean or an unclean animal, what is the differentiation between a clean and unclean animal? Anybody know? Yes. Animal with a split hoof. How do you know that? So it's in the Bible somewhere, is what he's saying. Leviticus chapter 11 will be a good place for you to go to be able to see that. And you look at the dietary laws, and the very last verse of Leviticus 11 says that you've got to know and differentiate between those animals that are clean and unclean. Remember, Moses is the one that wrote the book of Leviticus. He's the one that compiled the book of Genesis. And so you would understand that when he's saying this, he's not going to take all of this time in Genesis to go through every bit of that, but you can read Leviticus. I've given that to you in your notes to look at that chapter, look at the dietary laws, and go deeper into that for the clean and unclean. Actually, in here, if you know why he said get 7 of every clean animal and just 2 of every unclean animal, you can let me know, because the jury is out on that. There are so many different theories about what that number means. Is it just a perfect number? And I'm not going to do one of those other things like I've done in the past on this little small point and tell you about every 4 or 5 different views that are out there. But there are varying different views as to exactly why he said 7 on there. None of which have I ever do I consider right this second a time to really go so much into all of that. But you can certainly study that and go deeper about it. So 7 of every kind of bird, he says, to keep the various kinds alive throughout the earth. He tells us that in this. And God tells Noah now, he says, he's saying you've got a week's notice to be able to do this. In verse 4, he says, 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So, in this particular time, he's saying, y'all going to need to enter in the ark. He's kind of giving him the plan. The ark has been built at this point. He's saying, y'all need to go into the ark. Here's the animals that you need to be able to take with you. You've got 7 days, and then this rain is going to begin. It's going to rain for 40 days. It's going to rain for 40 nights. And he says, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Now, at this point, do you imagine that there are animals outside of just Mesopotamia and Asia Minor, outside of just that little pot of land in Israel and all of that? And do you imagine there's animals in other parts of the world? So I just want to stop and say, remember how we talked about last week. Some people say this wasn't a global flood, okay? They say it was a local flood. It was just, the Tigris or Euphrates River or whatever that's over there. They overflowed their banks, and it wiped out all the people in the area of the known world as far as the Bible is concerned. Well, I just don't know why they write it this way. They're quoting God as saying, I will wipe from the face of the earth, not from the face of this locality, every living creature I have made. I mean, I just take it for what it has said. And then again, Noah, it says Noah did all that God had commanded him. Yes, ma'am?
Question, something I thought about.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to wipe out all the things he's created. Now, he has created fish and everything under the water.
Yeah, he's going to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. And actually, I'm not exactly sure in this. Well, I got it right here. In the King James, it says, for yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 4 days, 4 nights, and every living substance I have made. So it's not a translation thing there. But context is king. We got to read the rest of the passage. As you go into looking at verse 6 through 10, we're going to see these are really going to spell out the events that took place during that 7-day period before the rains began. So Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds and all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And after the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. So, how long did it take for the animals to get there and get on the ark? It may have been 1 day, but it happened, all we know is it happened during that 7-day period. of time. You know, some people think, oh my goodness, the rains came and all them animals just got in there. It would have taken a hot minute, okay, to get all those animals on the ark. So we know, at least from what the Bible seems to say, that they had 7 days to load up that boat. And with the animals that were on that boat, easily, right? Easily, they could have done that in 7 days. Right? I mean, he didn't have to go out and get them animals, did he? What did it say about them animals? It says pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds and all the creatures moving along the ground, male and female. What's that next word right there? Oh, words matter. He didn't go hunting for them. He didn't say, listen, I've got to get a male. And could you see him checking all them birds to see which one's male and female and all the rest of it? That would be crazy. He would never have had time to do all that. They came to him because this is a supernatural event. That is easy. People try to say, well, how did the animals get on there? First of all, if you believe in the flood at all, then you have to believe that God is the one that's sending this punishment. God is highly active in this, and he would have been active in saying, animals, go. Right? I don't see why that's hard to believe. If that's the hardest thing for you to believe about the flood account is that God sent these animals and Noah didn't have to go get them, you got a lot of other stuff to worry about on there. That is very easy for me to understand that God would have done this. So they came to Noah, entered the ark, and look, it tells you, as God had commanded to Noah. This is a divinely inspired and orchestrated thing that is happening. Noah, as you've seen in verse 5, what did verse 5 say? Noah did all that God had commanded him. He's following the instructions of God, and so are the animals. So, in verse 10, after the 7 days, the floodwaters then came upon the earth. And so you get to verse 11, and verse 11 is amazing to me. Look at the detail in this. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, in 32 milliseconds, I mean, he's giving you down to the second hand time, almost at the 11th hour of the 16th, minute of the 32 seconds that we're into that next minute. Used to know somebody that sat on a board with me that used to tell everything in that kind of detail.
Do we know what calendar they use?
None. As far as no kind of calendar that we know of like this. As far as you're talking about in Noah's time. I'm sure they had measurements of months and all the rest of it in their weeks, but as far as how the readers are understanding this and how he's writing it and what they would have known when Moses is writing this stuff, and so in the months that and by the time Moses was writing that, then they were developing those calendars, but nothing that we know of like that today, and I would not know. That's something to look at. Well, yeah, I mean, we do look at different things, but we're looking at calendars that we've come up with now. There's really hardly no way to know exactly how people in Noah's day did it. We do look at the Julian and Gregorian calendars that we have and all of that stuff, and we're trying to figure out about when that time period was. But what my point is to you, we know that those came after, those calendars actually came after Noah's time. Well, that's what I'm saying. In the Hebrew calendars, what I should have said is what Moses. Yeah. That's what the people.
Went to the second month I wonder if that would equate to the second month in the Hebrew calendar.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm just saying that Noah wouldn't have known about the Hebrew calendar. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. When Moses is writing this, he's doing that for the benefit. I don't think Noah said, "Hey, it's February," or if it's Tishri. Like that. You got to understand Moses is writing this a lot of times later, but it would have been the Hebrew calendar that I'm talking about. Well, we've taken all of those calendars and tried to find out what exactly month they're talking about in this.
What about the Sumerian
You have to kind of in this take all of that stuff. You can look at the second month, but really and truly, do we know? Is this meaning the second month from the beginning? You would assume that, but I don't think anybody can really pinpoint exactly. But I think if Moses is writing this, my sense about it is he's going off of the Hebraic calendar, and he's looking at that second month. Yes. But we're assuming that he knows exactly what that time is, and I guess that would be true. But yeah,
He's pretty precise about it.
he's very precise about it. So
He probably knew about it.
I just don't think everybody gets dogmatic about that particular calendar, and they do say that this is the exact date. We date it based on the months of Noah. And you go back and look at all the time period. We're going to look at a chart in a minute, and I'll talk more about that. But he goes in and it tells you, so whatever you come up with as far as that second month, if it is the second month, what is that, Jim? I could look it up. But the second month on that day, and he goes, it's the 600th year of Noah's life. Okay, so he's 600 years old. That's 100 years after he's had his first child. All right, he had his first child when he was 500. And so he's had children. He's 600 years old. It's the 17th month, 17th day, of that second month. And all of that, and what I've read about this too, and why I don't really have a clear answer, is because is that talking about the second month of the calendar, or is it talking about the second month after Noah's birthday, basically, is what some of those things that are out there, because they're basing all of this after Noah. I don't know. Is the answer to all of that. But everything is based off of Noah's years. These are all referring back to Noah's life. On that day, whatever that specific day was, February the 17th, we'll go with, and the springs of the great deep burst forth. And I think that you must look at this detail. We sometimes think about this, oh, it's raining cats and dogs. It's been raining this week. It's awful. It was raining Saturday. It's messing up all my fishing time that I've got. I'm working. And you're thinking, is the flood coming again? Because we only really think about this as rain. There was much more than just rain when this flood comes. You have, the earth is made up of 70% water. A tremendous amount of water is under the ground. So that water bursts forth out of the ground as well. And then you had rain coming too. And it says, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Okay? So you had water coming up from the ground. You had rain coming down. And in verse 12 it says, and the rain itself fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. It is not probable, okay, and this is why this is important, in the water cycle, it's not probable that you can have enough rainfall, this is scientific stuff here, that could have possibly, condensation, evaporation, all of that stuff, that you could have produced enough rain to cover the earth, like it's about to say, coming down just from the clouds. Okay? If it had just said that, this would have made this story really not logical or plausible. However, it gives that detail in verse 11 that the great deep burst forth, okay, because you're going to look at something here in a minute and you're going to be able to see just how much water the Bible is telling us was on the planet at this time. It just wouldn't have been able to rain down just that much just in 40 days and 40 nights. Didn't have to. Now, verse 13 says, on that very day, Noah and his son, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. So the flood waters and the rain and all that has begun. It's at the end of that 7-day period. The rain is now, and the floods are coming. And you now see Noah and them actually going to get into the ark itself. Now, I ask in your notes, and I jumped ahead of myself because I hadn't turned the paper over, but I put a chart here in your notes about the year of Noah, the month that is coming from, dating from him, and that's really what I believe about this as far as it being Noah's second month of his 600th year. The 10th day of that period of time, he entered the ark. Then you look at the day 17, the heavens open, and you kind of go down and you see the timeline there of how this took place. A total of 370 days from Noah entering the ark until he disembarked the ark. The rain stopping, all of that stuff, you can look at those details. It was 100. The rain fell for the 40 days and 40 nights, but it was 150 total days of the water sitting upon the earth, we'll see in a minute as well. So the Bible gives us so much detail, so many days and all these things here for us to be able to track how this happened. Remember, the Epic of Gilgamesh said that flood happened in 7 days. Well, does that make sense that you would have had all of that? I mean, which is more believable? That you had these deeps busting forth and the heavens opening up and all of this water that is going to cover the entire earth, and that happened with rain for 40 days and 40 nights, in addition to the stuff coming out of the ground, or just one solid week of things like that happening. Again, the Bible gives tremendous detail. We'll look at it.
Mike mentioned this last week, but you know, it never rained on the earth. It never rained on this earth till this happened. Can you imagine all the people that were outside of the ark saying, what is all this coming down and what they went through?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, some of the have you heard the teaching with some that said that a lot of people believe that
The canopy.
earth is surrounded with the canopy, canopy and,
Yeah.
and moisture or whatever it was.
We talked about that early on. Mm-hmm. I'm not a subscriber to the canopy theory on there. A lot of details out there too about the rain and how and these hundreds of years of whether or not did it not rain at all, how much did it rain, those types of things when you look at that. But many I will say apologetic ministries and creationists have kind of set the canopy theory to the side because it would have caused, if that is true and you had the earth covered in a water vapor canopy, that would have caused a massive amount of ozone type problems and gamma rays from the sun. And so you also have problems with that canopy. Is it in the expanse? Where was that canopy? Was it in the atmosphere? And a lot of people saying it's in the expanse. Well, the expanse is way further than the planets are concerned. So little issues with that, but it did almost solve how that broke forth and all that water came down. But it would have caused a lot of problem with life living on the earth. Biologists see having that water vapor. Huh?
After the canopy burst or whatever.
Before the canopy was burst, because all the light and stuff coming from the sun would have to pass through that water stuff, and it wouldn't have been able to filter down, and it would have caused problems with plants and how they grow, the atmosphere, how hot it is on the planet, all of that kind of stuff. Our total environment on the planet would be different with that big of a water vapor separating us from the sun's light, is what the issues are with that. But it's still a theory that is out there, but it's not as heavily supported. I don't think so, but it is a theory out there. On that very day, Noah and his sons, as I read, they enter into the ark. Verse 14, they had with them, this is important, it's just going to repeat it, but they did do what God said. They had with them every wild animal according to its kind, all livestock according to their kinds, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every kind of bird, every bird according to its kind, everything with wings. Pairs of creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. So again, it was saying that earlier that this was what was going to happen. God saying, hey, you're going to go into the ark. You're going to get these animals in. 7 days happened. And this is just repeating. It did happen. It did occur. They did enter the ark. The animals did enter the ark. They are in there is what these verses here 13 through 16. The animals going in were male and female of every living thing, as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut them in. Now that one piece right there is important. The Again, the Lord is doing this. The Lord should have been, let's take a little bit of, this is literal history. I think I put this in the bullet point in your notes. This is literal history. This literally happened. This was a literal ark that was built. Literal animals are filled in this ark. Only 8 humans are in there. All of this kind of stuff. But I think you can take great symbolism from this verse right here. And you can see that if God just shut this door, what does it mean for everybody outside of that door? They can't get in. The point of no return has just happened when that door got shut. But what's it mean for those inside? They're saved. That is a direct correlation to what God's going to do for us. The Bible equates that in other parts of the scripture that I didn't reference here about Noah and about salvation and about the fact that there is a day to when God is going to shut the literal door. Okay? And those, just like in the days of Noah, those that are inside, those that are saved, those that are truly have done whatever it is that you got to do to get in, surrender in your life, for all those word plays that we want to say. When you confess with your mouth and you believe in your heart, as Paul said in Romans 10, when you have done that, you're in. But if you have not, it's a point of no return. It's not this deal, y'all. You don't even see it here, where you can go up and knock real hard on the door and it opens up again. You're not going to get onto a smaller life raft. Once the door is shut, it's shut.
Corey,
Yes.
don't you think, think that people were knocking on that?
I think they were beating that thing to death.
Beat that thing, trying to get that door open
Yeah.
while the water's increased.
Yeah.
They couldn't open it.
Think about this. As we've talked about before, maybe some of the very people that helped build it.
That's right. Had to be. Had to be.
Think about what that means now. How many people, if you look at the symbolism of this now, I'm not saying I can read this in the scripture, but I'm going to take a little bit of license here. Think about how many people work in the church, work in ministry, but it'll be on the other side of the door when it shuts. I got so much goosebumps when I was looking at this before, and as God was, holy bumps, whatever you want to call them. But when God was seeing this, you know what's amazing to me about this? He could have just ended this then. He didn't have to save those 8. He could have said, I'm done. I'm tired of this. I got the angels. They had their problems. I created man. They've got their problems. He's wiping them out. Remember what it said, that when God looked, that every inclination of man's heart was wicked and evil. Yet he still saw fit to bestow grace and mercy and save 8. And at this point, you're looking at that and I'm thinking, this is thousands of years ago, and he's still putting up with us. We still have a chance. What a God. We talk about how awful he is and mean he is, that he wiped the slate clean here. I'm thinking, man, he had a remnant. He saved 8 people. He didn't have to. I think they all had a chance. But it shows you that direct correlation, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago and talked about a little bit last week too. They had about 75 years to build this ark. Who said that they did not have teams upon teams of people working, carpenters, bronze and iron working people that are up there doing this? How many? It didn't say that Noah and his 3 sons and the wives are the only ones that built it and come up with all of the things to do it and pitched the whole thing. And so if you believe that part, that there were some of those people that were out there. Noah, I helped you build that ark. And that goes right in to the scripture. It says in Matthew that on that day, many will call out to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out many demons? Did we not perform miracles? And I may have got those out of order. And he'll look at those same people and he'll say, depart from me, you worker of iniquity. I never knew you. The door gets shut in their face. There are criteria to have gotten on the ark, and that criteria was righteousness. It wasn't how hard Noah worked. It wasn't how skillful he was to build a boat. It was that Noah was found to be righteous. And what does it mean to be righteous? It means to be in right standing and right alignment with God. You must be that way today. Now, can we be righteous without Christ? No, we can't. I heard somebody tell you one time, well, you want to get to the place where your heart is so pure, or whatever the case may be, when God looks at it. And I went, man, I don't want God to look at my heart. When I get to, and I wasn't here, Jim, but Jim's been teaching on the judgment seat of Christ. When we get to the judgment seat of Christ, you don't want him to go out there and judge how pure your heart may or may not be. All you want him to see is the shed blood of Christ covering your heart. If that isn't upon your heart, then if that blood is not covering you in an atoning sacrifice way, you are deeply in trouble. Okay? So I think that in verse 16, it is amazing to see how God is displaying grace to 8 and all those animals. But that does not mean that at the very same time, when the very same act, he is displaying wrath to others. He is merciful, he is gracious, he is loving, he is all the rest of it, but he's also just, he also has wrath, and he also delivers whatever punishment that he sees fit. If you don't take him with all of that, you're not serving the whole God, you're just serving one. If you don't think he delivers a little whipping, you're crazy. He certainly is a wrathful God as much as he's loving and all the rest. The animals going in were male and female, every kind. I already read that. 40 days, again, the flood kept coming on the earth. And as the waters increased, they lifted the ark. What's that say? High above the earth. Now, that doesn't mean in the space, okay? It means high above the ground, okay? High above the ground. Now, how high, you say? How high above the ground, I wonder, did it just lift this ark? The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. So again, we know it was seaworthy. It's floating at this point. They rose greatly on the earth, and the high mountains and the entire heavens were covered. Under the entire heavens were covered. The high mountains. Now, I've put in your notes here a fun little fact about Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain that we know of today. I want to stress that we know of today. Mount Everest is 29,029 feet tall. Almost 30,000 feet tall. And we're saying here, now, let me just submit to you, it may be that Mount Everest was not here during this period of time. I'll explain that in a minute. Explain it a lot better next week. Not next week, we're out next week, but the week after that when we look at chapter 8. But you're talking about, there were high mountains during this time period, I can guarantee you, and all these mountains are covered. Again, picture of a global flood or picture of a local flood? You tell me. Seems like this is a massive amount of water. And now also, if you were to take the earth and you were to take all the land that we have and smooth it out, okay? Not cut it out, but just smooth it out and make all of the land that we have now consistent around, we would be a ball covered with water. There's only 30% land, 70% water. So if you didn't have these mountains and all that stuff, everything would go over and you'd have ground under the water. It is very easy to scientifically understand right now how the earth, if the topography and geography was different, could right now be covered by water, okay? So obviously it's easy to understand how some part of that 70% could have covered the 30% that is out there. So anyway, there's no scientific reason why that could not have happened. So you see here it says all these high mountains. So I think that's pretty high. Let's just say Mount Everest is here. That's 30,000 feet high. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of 20 feet. So he doesn't stop and say it just covered the mountain. It said it covered the highest mountains 20 feet deep. I think he's doubling down, don't you? I think they're trying to leave no ambiguity whatsoever that this was a bad flood that covered the entire world. I mean, you may not agree with it, But it says it. I don't understand how people can say, and Christian, I guess if you want to call them Christian people, can teach this and say this is local. This just happened right around Israel and whatnot. Folks, that's crazy. It says entire. I mean, Greek, Hebrew, whatever you want to look at it. That's what it says. So 20 feet deep. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you know, when the archaeologists go digging around these mountains and all, they find fossils from the sea.
That's what I was fixing to tell you. My next point. That on Mount Everest, 29,029 feet high, on its summit, you find marine limestone. Inside of the marine limestone, you find bottom-dwelling marine animals, fossilized.
And the same thing with the limestone that built the pyramids in Egypt.
Same thing. Now, they would have obviously, used some of that stuff and taken it up there on pyramids and whatnot. But how can you have a mountain 29,000 feet tall and find marine fossils on it if it's never been covered by water? If at least that ground had never been covered by water. Yes.
I climbed a mountain in Pennsylvania, and I found seashells right there. The Pocono Mountains.
Yeah. I can't say every, because I've obviously not climbed every mountain, but from what I understand, the vast majority of mountains, you find marine fossils on it. I have a solution to how that could have not been a global flood. I'll say it in a minute. Verse 21 says, every living thing that moved on the earth perished. Every living thing in that Mesopotamian area, it says every living thing that moved on the earth, Carolyn. This is the answer to your question. Every living thing that moved on the earth, moved on the ground, okay, perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind.
So everything that was in the water to begin with is still alive.
You would have, some of them may have died because of the churning up of stuff, but if they survived it with that, no. That's why he did not, if you also notice, he did not have to take whales on the ark with him, yeah. If he had killed all of those animals, he didn't have them on the ark, they would have all been dead and we wouldn't have marine animals today. So no, they were out there swimming like, wait, this is awesome, we got more water. But the birds would not have had places to land, okay, on the ground. They would not have had food to be able to eat, so the birds died. Obviously, the humans weren't able to survive all of that, and the creatures. Dinosaurs wouldn't have been able to survive water in this way and swim. So, verse 22, excuse me, I didn't read the end of that. It says, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures swarm. Yeah, I did. Everything on dry land, here again, that had breath of life in its nostrils died. Can you imagine the carnage that would have been out there in all of this stuff? Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Men and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds of the air were wiped from the face of the earth, right from the earth. Only Noah was left and those with him in the ark. Now people will read that and say, what an awful, wrathful God. But if you forget that last part, he did save some. If he saves one, that's gracious. That is bestowing unearned favor to somebody if he just lets one person make it into heaven. You can't charge God with being unjust even if he didn't save one. But on this, here, when you look at verse 24, the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Now, that 150 days were taken into the 40 days of rain, too. So that's why I said earlier, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, 150 total days. That was 110 days this water just sat here. Now, whenever you have had floods happen, y'all may have been here in 1994. I was alive, but I happen to have been 6. At the time. But in 1994, we had the flood. And what was left on the ground and all of that after the flood waters receded? A lot of sediment and mud. If we had not cleaned that up, I'm sure there were animals or could have been people I know that were killed in that sediment. Had you left those people in that sediment, those animals and stuff in that sediment, and had the right, all kind of other conditions that would have taken place over the years, you know what you would have had later on? Fossils. What is the best? So I put in your notes here that if I can find where I put that question, not a question really, but a statement. I can't find it right here. But when you look at the fact that there are fossils all over the world, there are millions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the world. What is one good explanation of that? That you had a global flood. And that's one of the things that Ken Ham, with Answers in Genesis Ministries, he said there's billions of dead things buried in rock layers, covered by water all over the earth. We find fossils on mountains. We find fossils in valleys. We find billions and billions of dead things that are fossilized. You don't become a fossil by dropping dead on this church floor and rotting. You become a fossil by dying and being quickly covered by sediment. So there's only two things that are in popular thought that could have caused fossils like this. Number one, a flood that would have churned up a lot of sediment, or number two, an asteroid that hit the earth, blowing up all of that sediment that then covered the dinosaurs. If an asteroid was that big, tell me where the crater's at. Yet we don't find a crater that big. We do find smaller craters where asteroids have hit the earth, but look, every one of them, they say, well, no, that wasn't the one that took out the dinosaurs. It wasn't a big enough crater. You would look like the moon. Half the earth, if you look, the earth wouldn't be spherical anymore. You'd have a big gap out of it. Look like the Death Star on Star Wars. If y'all don't watch Star Wars, you don't know that the Death Star's got a dent in it anyway. If we don't see that, we really do not see evidence of a crater, of an asteroid. But what we do see is evidence of a flood. Literally everywhere. Again, mountains. Now, I was going to tell you about, it may not have had to be that there was a flood, a global flood. You could say that that mountain before was level on the ground, and it was once underwater, and there were tectonic plates, the plates of the earth that moved, that formed that mountain over years, and a mountain and land that used to be underwater is now high. You could say that, right? And that would be a very logical thought. That's how mountains get formed now. The earth's mantle and crust shifts. It goes down, you have a mountain. I wonder what one of the best explanations could be of the earth. You know, we believe, and I taught about this early on, about how the earth was one big continent. Rhodina, actually, and then Pangea that we talk about, and now we have the 7 continents and all the rest. Even all popular geologists today believe that the earth once had one solid landmass. I wonder how you could get that land to separate pretty quickly. I wonder how you could get the earth's crust to move very rapidly to make mountains as high as Everest. If you had a bunch of water gushing up from the bottom of the earth and water coming down, and all that water is moving, all of that sediment and those tectonic plates, and then that water recedes at some point, I think it changed the face of the earth, don't you? That's right. I think it did change the face of the earth. It may have. So again, whether you look at it as the waters rising to the level to cover Mount Everest, and that's how the marine fossils got up there, or you look at the fact that the really only logical thing that could have made the Earth's topography change so much to have sea level ground go up 29,000 feet would have had to have been like a major flood that would have disrupted the Earth's mantle and crust at that point. So either way you go, the flood answers the questions of the things that we see today. The difference between pagan myths and things like the Epic of Gilgamesh that we looked at last week, they don't stand up to scrutiny. When you look at them through a magnifying glass, the information doesn't make sense. But when you look at the Bible, it makes sense. He wrote it to us. He gave us these details. He gave us, as we studied in Genesis chapter 5, he gave us those genealogies so that we could understand this does make sense. This is how this happened. This is how the generations came about and all the rest. The details of the Bible matter. They matter in a great way. They're not meant to just be, scathed over because you think they're boring. If you haven't gotten down at the details, don't excite you, I worry about you. Okay? I worry about you. I'm not saying you can't make it to heaven. I'm not saying that, because you can. It's a lot easier than we think to make it to heaven. But I sure want to learn as much as I can. I want to understand as much as I can. I want to get into heaven and not have so many questions, but that's going to be one of the greatest things when we get to heaven. If you wasn't here for my study on heaven, when you die, and even if it's the rapture, you do not get blessed with omniscience at that moment. You don't become all-knowing. We're going to have eternity in heaven to ask questions. We're going to be able to go up to Paul and say, what do you mean about letting them women talk in church? What do you mean? And like I said before, he's going to say, not what you was preaching. Oh, couldn't you have sent a message to me? No, there's an abyss between both of us, whatever the case may have been. We're going to get to question God and say, what about that? And what about this? And tell me more. And I love the fact that I'm not going to get imparted with some kind of memory download of all of that stuff, that I'm going to get to go up to God himself and ask questions, and Paul and all of them that wrote things in the Bible, and we're going to be able to figure those things out then. But as we are right now, I want to pursue it. I want to know, and because I get to know more and more and more. Everything I find out, all these details and all, it shows me how awesome the God that we serve is. It makes me just want to surrender more and more of everything to him. And it shows me how unworthy I am to be called his child, to be called his friend, and certainly to be called a co-heir with his son. Did you have something to say? They wouldn't have been able to. They would not have been able to.